My son looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're useless now, Dad. You only bring me problems." I was 72 years old, had just lost almost everything I'd built in my life, and I heard the door slam for the last time. In that moment, I thought my life was over, that I was just a burden, a nuisance to the person I loved most. But what happened in the next 2 years completely changed my perspective on purpose, family, and the true meaning of being useful in this world. Today, 3 years later, my son calls me every week begging me to come back to the family. And hundreds of people call me a hero. If you're feeling useless, abandoned, or thinking your time has passed, this story will change your perspective forever. My name is John Silva. I'm 75 years old. And for 45 years of my life, I built a small carpentry business here in Detroit. I started with nothing, literally nothing. My father died when I was 16, and I had to support my mother and 2 younger brothers. Let me paint you a picture of how desperate things were. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The walls were so thin you could hear every conversation, every argument, every crying baby from our neighbors. My mother worked double shifts at a textile factory, but it wasn't enough. My brothers, Michael and David, were 12 and 8 years old, and they looked at me like I was supposed to have all the answers. I remember my first day working construction. I was 16, skinny as a rail, and the foreman laughed when I showed up. "Kid, you sure you're old enough to be here?" But I needed that job. I worked 12 hours carrying heavy materials, mixing cement, learning from the older guys who took pity on me. After work, I'd go to the public library and read everything I could about carpentry, about building, about business. The librarian, Mrs. Rodriguez, started setting aside carpentry books for me. She'd say, "John, here's another one for your collection." She never asked why a teenager was so obsessed with learning a trade, but somehow she knew it mattered. It took me 3 years to save enough money to buy my first set of tools. Real tools, not the broken ones I'd been borrowing. When I held that new hammer in my hands for the first time, I cried. I actually cried because it felt like hope. I started taking small jobs on weekends, fixing cabinets, building simple shelves, repairing furniture. Word spread slowly in our neighborhood that there was a young guy who did good work for fair prices. By the time I was 22, I had enough steady customers to quit construction and start my own small business. The early years were brutal. I worked out of our garage, which I rented from our landlord for an extra $50 a month. In winter, it was so cold, I had to warm my hands over a space heater every 30 minutes just to keep working. In summer, the heat was unbearable. But I couldn't afford to install proper ventilation. But I had a vision. Every piece of furniture I made, I imagined it going into a home where a family would gather around it. Dinner tables where children would do homework, where parents would have important conversations, where holidays would be celebrated. That vision kept me going through the 18-hour days. When I met Martha at a church dance in 1974, I was 27 and still struggling to grow the business. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, with these incredible green eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. But more than that, she believed in my dream when I could barely afford to take her to dinner. Our first date was a picnic I made with sandwiches from home, sitting on a blanket in the park while I told her about my plans to build the best custom furniture in Detroit. Most women would have run from a guy with sawdust under his fingernails and big dreams, but little money. Martha listened to every word and said, "John, I can see it. I can see exactly what you're talking about." We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony. I couldn't afford a honeymoon, so we spent our wedding night in our tiny apartment, planning the future of Silva Carpentry. Martha had this incredible ability to see potential where others saw problems. When we finally saved enough to rent a real workshop space, it was a disaster. The roof leaked, the electrical was shot, and the previous tenant had left it full of junk. Martha walked through that mess and said, "This is perfect, John. Look at all this space. Look at these windows. Imagine how beautiful your work will look in this natural light." She rolled up her sleeves and spent the next 3 weekends helping me clean, paint, and make that place into something special. For 5 years, Martha worked as a secretary during the day and kept the books for Silva Carpentry at night. She answered phones, scheduled appointments, and handled customer complaints with a grace I could never match. When difficult customers got angry about delays or prices, Martha had this way of calming them down and making them feel heard. In 1979, we found out Martha was pregnant. I remember sitting in that doctor's office, holding her hand, feeling terrified and excited at the same time. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. in the workshop, starting work on the most beautiful crib I could. Imagine, every joint had to be perfect, every edge smooth as silk. This wasn't just furniture. This was going to hold my child. Robert was born on October 15, 1979, weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces. The moment they placed him in my arms, everything changed. I looked at this tiny person, completely dependent on me, and I made a promise. "Son, you're going to have everything I never had. You're going to have security, opportunity, and choices." But life had other plans. When Robert was only 2 years old, Martha was diagnosed with breast cancer. The treatments were expensive, brutal, and ultimately unsuccessful. She fought for 18 months with a courage that still takes my breath away. Even during chemotherapy, when she was weak and nauseous, she would sit in the workshop with Robert on her lap, helping me with paperwork. Martha died on a Tuesday morning in March 1983. Robert was 3.5, and I was a 35-year-old widower with a business to run and a son to raise. I remember standing at her grave, holding Robert's tiny hand, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The next few years were the hardest of my life. I had to become mother and father to Robert while keeping the business growing. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to prep work for the day, get Robert ready for daycare, work until 6 p.m., pick him up, make dinner, help with whatever a 4-year-old needs help with, and then go back to the workshop to finish orders until midnight. Mrs. Rodriguez from the library, the same woman who had helped me all those years ago, became like a grandmother to Robert. When daycare was closed or Robert was sick, she would watch him at the library. Robert learned to read sitting at her desk, surrounded by stacks of books. She'd say, "John, this boy is special. Make sure he gets to college." I threw myself into work with an obsession that probably wasn't healthy. Every custom dining table, every handcrafted bedroom set, every kitchen cabinet was built with the same thought: this money goes toward Robert's future. I wanted him to have choices I never had. By the time Robert was 10, Silva Carpentry had 6 employees and a reputation for the finest custom work in the city. We were booked solid for months in advance. Rich families from the suburbs would drive to our workshop to commission pieces. I was proud of what we built, but I was also exhausted. Robert was growing up mostly raised by babysitters and Mrs. Rodriguez. I justified it by telling myself I was building his future, but I was missing his present. School plays, baseball, games, parent-teacher conferences. I attended when I could, but the business always seemed to need me more urgently. When Robert turned 16, I bought him a car. Not just any car, a brand new Honda Civic that cost more than I'd made in my first 3 years of business. He was grateful, but I could see something in his eyes that worried me. Distance. Like he appreciated what I was giving him but didn't quite know how to connect with the man who was giving it. High school graduation came and went. Robert had good grades, got accepted to the University of Michigan for business school. I was bursting with pride. "Dad," he said the night before leaving for college, "thank you for everything. I know how hard you worked for this." But even then, there was a formality to it. Like he was thanking a benefactor rather than hugging his father. College years flew by. Robert would come home for holidays and summer breaks, but he felt like a visitor in his own house. He'd bring friends occasionally, and I'd overhear them talking about their families, weekend trips, family game nights, inside jokes. Robert would listen politely but never add stories of his own. After graduation, Robert got a job at a marketing firm in downtown Detroit. Good salary, benefits, a future. He moved Sunday dinners every other week. Phone calls on birthdays and holidays. Polite conversations about work, weather, and current events. Never anything deeper. Never anything real. When Robert met Carla, I was hopeful things might change. She was warm, funny, and seemed to genuinely care about family connections. At their wedding, she made a point of including me in every tradition, every photo, every moment. "Mr. Silva," she said during the reception, "Robert talks about you all the time. He's so proud of what you built." But I noticed that when she said this, Robert looked uncomfortable. Proud, maybe, but also burdened by that pride. When Sophia was born in 2012, I thought I might finally get a chance to be the grandfather I'd never quite learned to be as a father. I spoiled her completely, every toy she pointed at, every book she wanted, every ice cream she asked for. She'd run to me with her arms wide open, calling Grandpa, Grandpa. And for those moments, I felt like I'd finally figured out how to love someone without making it complicated. 2 years later, Peter arrived, and now I had two little people who were genuinely excited to see me. Sunday dinners became the highlight of my week. I'd show up with presents, help Carla in the kitchen, play games with the kids until they were exhausted, but I could still feel that distance with Robert. He was grateful for my involvement with his children, but there was always this invisible wall between us. Like he was protecting himself from something. The carpentry business continued to thrive through Robert's 20s. We'd expanded to 10 employees, had a bigger workshop, and I was even considering opening a second location. I was 68 years old and finally starting to think about retirement. Then 2019 hit like a freight train. The pandemic wasn't just a health crisis for small businesses like mine, it was an extinction event. Overnight, families stopped ordering custom furniture. Restaurants closed, which meant no more commercial work. Weddings were canceled, which meant no more bridal furniture sets. But worse than the immediate loss of income was watching my employees, people who had worked for me for decades, lose their jobs. Miguel had been with me for 15 years. He'd started as a teenager sweeping sawdust and had become my most skilled craftsman. When I had to lay him off, he cried. A 35-year-old man with 2 kids, crying because the only job he'd ever really loved was disappearing. Sarah, my office manager for 8 years, who knew every customer's preferences and every supplier's delivery schedule. She'd organized our chaos into something that actually worked efficiently. Letting her go felt like cutting off my own arm. One by one, I had to lay off the people who had become my extended family. By December 2019, it was just me in that big, quiet workshop, trying to fill a handful of orders with arthritis setting into my hands and the weight of failure crushing my spirit. Robert's patience with my situation started wearing thin. At first, he was supportive. "Dad, it's temporary. Things will bounce back." But as months passed and the business continued to struggle, his tone changed. "Dad, you need to adapt. Everything is online now. You need a website, social media marketing, virtual consultations." He'd show up with printed articles about businesses that had successfully pivoted during the pandemic. "Look at this company. They started offering DIY furniture kits. Look at this one. They moved entirely to online sales." I tried. God knows I tried. I spent $2,000 I couldn't afford on a web designer who created something that looked professional, but might as well have been written in a foreign language for all I could understand it. I attempted to create Instagram posts, taking pictures of my work with my old flip phone, posting them with captions that Robert said made me sound like I was from the Stone Age. The computer classes I mentioned, those were at the community center, full of people my age all struggling with the same things. The instructor, a patient 25-year-old named Jessica, would repeat the same basic instructions over and over while we fumbled with trackpads and tried to remember passwords we'd written on scraps of paper and lost. I felt like an immigrant in my own country, unable to speak the language that everyone else seemed to understand fluently. In March 2020, I got the call that ended everything. My biggest remaining client, a hotel chain that had ordered $50,000 worth of custom lobby furniture, was canceling their order. "Mr. Silva, we're so sorry, but we're not even sure we'll survive this ourselves." That night, I sat in my workshop surrounded by half-finished pieces that represented thousands of hours of work and thousands of dollars of materials that I'd never be paid for. I was 72 years old, nearly broke, and utterly lost. The next morning, I called Robert to tell him I was putting the business up for sale. The silence on the phone lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he said, "Dad, why didn't you talk to me first? I could have helped you find buyers. I could have helped you negotiate better terms, but the damage was done. I'd accepted an offer that gave me just enough to pay off business debts and keep my house. Everything I'd built over 45 years sold for less than the cost of Robert's college education. That's when our relationship really started falling apart. Robert was frustrated with what he saw as my poor business decisions. I was embarrassed by what I saw as my failure to keep up with a changing world. Every conversation became tense. Every piece of advice he offered felt like criticism. Every visit felt like an inspection where I was constantly found lacking. Sunday dinners became monthly dinners, then holiday dinners, then just Christmas and Easter. Phone calls went from weekly check-ins to brief exchanges of basic information. "How are you feeling, Dad?" "Fine, son." "How are the kids?" "Good, Dad." "Okay, I have to go." Sophia and Peter started asking Carla, "Why doesn't Grandpa come over anymore?" Carla would make excuses, but I could see the strain it was putting on her too. She was caught between her husband's growing impatience with me and her children's love for their grandfather. The final conversation happened on a rainy Thursday in November 2020. Robert came over to discuss what he called practical matters. He wanted to talk about my finances, my health, my long-term care plans. "Dad, you're 73 years old. You're living alone in a house that's too big for you. You're not taking care of yourself properly. Carla and I have been talking, and we think you should consider assisted living." Assisted living. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "Robert, I'm fine. I can take care of myself." "Dad, you're not fine. You're isolated. You're depressed, and honestly, you're becoming a burden. Every conversation we have, you complain about money, about being lonely, about how the world has changed. It's exhausting." That word, burden, hung in the air between us like a physical thing. "I never asked you to take care of me," I said. "No, but you expect it. You expect me to drop everything when you need help with your computer, or when you can't figure out how to pay a bill online, or when you want someone to talk to because you're lonely." The argument escalated from there. Years of buried resentment came pouring out. He accused me of being stubborn, of refusing to adapt, of wallowing in self-pity. I accused him of being ungrateful, of forgetting everything I'd sacrificed for his future. "You know what, Dad?" he finally said, standing up to leave. "You're right. You sacrificed everything for my future, including being a real father. All you ever gave me was money and things, never yourself. And now that you don't have money to give anymore, you don't know how to relate to me at all. That's not fair, Robert. Isn't it? When did we ever just talk? When did you ever ask me about my dreams, my fears, my hopes? When did you ever tell me about yours? You worked 18 hours a day to pay for my life, but you were never actually in my life." He was right, and we both knew it. But it hurt too. Much to admit. I did the best I could, I said quietly. I know you did, Dad, but your best wasn't enough. And now you're expecting me to make up for a lifetime of missed connections, and I can't do it. I have my own family to focus on. That's when he said it. You're useless now, Dad. You only bring me problems. The door slammed and I was alone for the next 6 months. I barely left the house except to buy groceries and go to doctor appointments. I'd wake up around noon, watch television until evening, eat dinner alone, and go to bed early just to make the days pass faster. Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor, was the only human being I had regular contact with. She was 80 years old, a widow whose husband had died 3 years earlier. We'd sit on our porches in the late afternoon, not talking much, just acknowledging each other's presence. She'd lost her son in Afghanistan in 2008, and her daughter lived in California with her own family. Mrs. Thompson understood loneliness in a way that didn't require explanation. During those dark months, I started noticing things about my neighborhood that I'd been too busy to see during my working years. The single mother next door, Maria, who worked 2 jobs and was always exhausted. Her 3 kids, ages 6, 9, and 12, spent most afternoons unsupervised, trying to do homework at the kitchen table while their mother slept between shifts. There was old Mr. Patterson, a Korean War veteran who lived alone with his cat. I'd see him walking to the corner store every day, buying just enough food for 1 meal, because carrying more was too difficult with his bad back. The Morrison family had 4 teenagers, and the 2 youngest boys were clearly struggling in school. I'd hear their mother arguing with teachers on the phone, frustrated because she didn't understand the homework well enough to help them. I started paying attention to these small dramas playing out around me, and I realized something. I wasn't the only one who felt forgotten. That's when Mrs. Thompson knocked on my door that Tuesday morning in March, crying about her grandson Tommy. Tommy lived with his mother, Sandra, Mrs. Thompson's daughter-in-law. Sandra was 28, worked as a waitress at a local diner, and was raising Tommy alone after his father walked out when Tommy was 4. When the doctor said Tommy had leukemia, Sandra's world collapsed. The treatment was going to cost tens of thousands of dollars. Sandra had no insurance through her job at the diner. She'd applied for assistance programs, but was stuck in bureaucratic red tape while her son needed treatment immediately. Mrs. Thompson had some savings, but nowhere near enough. The family was facing the choice between going into crushing debt or watching Tommy suffer without proper treatment. Standing in my living room, watching this 80-year-old woman cry for her grandson, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: purpose. I spent the next week making phone calls, researching programs, talking to social workers and hospital administrators. I discovered there were resources available, but navigating them required patience, persistence, and time. Things Sandra didn't have while working double shifts and caring for a sick child. I became Tommy's advocate. I filled out applications, made appointments, sat in waiting rooms, and argued with insurance representatives. I used my stubborn old man persistence as a weapon against bureaucracy, but more than that, I started spending time with Tommy during his treatment. Sandra couldn't always be there because she'd lose her job if she missed too many shifts. So I'd sit with Tommy during his chemotherapy sessions, reading him books, playing simple games, just being present. Tommy was scared, of course, but he was also curious about everything. "Mr. John," he'd ask, "what did you do when you were young?" I started telling him stories about building furniture, about learning carpentry, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with your hands. His eyes would light up. "Could you teach me to build something?" When Tommy was feeling well enough, I'd take him to my garage and show him basic woodworking. Nothing dangerous, just measuring, marking, sanding smooth pieces of wood. He was a natural, with steady hands and genuine interest. That's when I had the idea that changed everything. I called Maria next door. Maria, I know your kids struggle with homework after school. What if I offered free tutoring? Just basic stuff, reading, math, whatever they need help with. She was suspicious at first. In our neighborhood, people didn't usually offer help without wanting something in return, but she was desperate. Mr. Silva, if you're serious, that would be amazing. I can pay you a little ... No payment. Just send them over around 4 p.m. when they get home from school. Word spread quickly. Within 2 weeks, I had 8 kids coming to my house every afternoon. My dining room became a homework center. I helped with math problems, listened to kids practice reading aloud, and explained science concepts using examples from carpentry and building. But the most important thing I did was just listen. These kids had so much to say, so many questions, so many dreams they'd never had an adult take seriously. Marcus, age 10, wanted to be an astronaut but was failing math. I showed him how carpenters use geometry and measurements in every project. Marcus, I said, rockets are just really complicated carpentry projects. You need to understand math to build anything that needs to stay together. Asisha, age 8, loved to draw but was convinced she wasn't good at anything academic. I taught her about architectural drawings, showed her how artists and builders work together. Aisha, the most beautiful buildings start with someone who can draw their dreams. Within a month, all 8 kids were improving in school. More importantly, they were excited about learning in a way they'd never been before. Mrs. Thompson was watching this transformation happen, and she made a suggestion that changed everything. John, you should teach Tommy and the other kids some of that carpentry knowledge you've been sharing. Give them real skills they can use. That's how the weekend woodworking classes started. Every Saturday morning, I'd have 6 to 8 kids in my garage, learning basic carpentry skills. We started with simple projects, birdhouses, small shelves, toy boxes. But the real magic wasn't in what they were building with their hands. It was what was building in their confidence. Kids who struggled in school discovered they were brilliant with tools. Kids who felt stupid became teachers, showing newer students how to use a level or sandwood smooth. Kids who had never completed anything in their lives finished projects they could hold up with pride. Marcus, the future astronaut, built a rocket-shaped pencil holder. Aisha designed and built a small easel for her drawings. Tommy, when he was feeling strong enough, created a jewelry box for his mother that made her cry. Happy tears. But the project that really changed everything was the community garden. The empty lot next to my house had been an eyesore for years. Overgrown weeds, scattered trash, broken glass. The city owned it, but had no plans for it. One day, watching the kids walk past it on their way to tutoring, I had an idea. What if we turned this wasteland into something beautiful? I started by just cleaning it up myself. Every morning, I'd spend an hour pulling weeds, picking up trash, clearing the space. Neighbors started noticing. Mrs. Thompson began helping. Then Maria from next door. Then Mr. Patterson with his bad back, doing what he could. After 2 weeks of cleaning, I approached the city about turning the lot into a community garden. The bureaucrat I spoke with was skeptical. Mr. Silva, community gardens require ongoing maintenance, management, insurance. I'll handle all of that, I said. It took 3 months of paperwork, meetings, and persistence, but we got approval. The city even provided water access and basic fencing. That's when the real magic happened. Families started claiming small plots. Kids from my tutoring group planted vegetables alongside their parents. Mrs. Thompson started an herb section that became legendary in the neighborhood. Mr. Patterson, despite his bad back, grew the most beautiful tomatoes anyone had ever seen. The garden became more than just a place to grow food. It became the neighborhood's gathering place. People who had lived next to each other for years without speaking started sharing seeds, tools, and advice. Kids played between the rows while parents worked and talked. Saturday mornings became community Workdays. We'd all meet at 8 a.m. to weed, water, plant, and maintain our shared space. Then we'd share coffee and pastries that different families would bring. The garden attracted attention from other neighborhoods. Local news stations did stories about the neighborhood transformation. The city started asking me to consult on other community development projects. But the most beautiful part was watching the ripple effects. Mr. Patterson, inspired by the success of the garden, started a tool lending library in his garage. Why should everyone buy a power drill they'll use twice a year? He'd say, borrow mine, and when you're done, someone else can use it. Mrs. Thompson began teaching cooking classes, showing young mothers how to prepare healthy meals on tight budgets using vegetables from the garden. Maria, seeing how much her kids had improved with tutoring, started a neighborhood babysitting cooperative so single parents could cover for each other during emergencies or extra work shifts. What started as one old man helping one sick child had become a network of neighbors taking care of each other. 6 months after starting the garden, I was featured in the local newspaper. The headline was "Retired Carpenter Builds Community." That article changed my relationship with Robert forever. He called me the Monday after the article was published. His voice was different, softer, more uncertain than I'd heard in years. "Dad, I saw the newspaper article. I had no idea you were doing all this." We talked for an hour that day. Really talked in a way we hadn't since he was a child. He asked detailed questions about the kids I was tutoring, the garden, the woodworking classes. But I could hear something else in his voice, regret, maybe even guilt. "Dad, I'm proud of you. But I'm sorry. I was so focused on what you couldn't do anymore that I never asked what you might want to do." 3 weeks later, Robert showed up at my house on a Saturday morning. Not for a scheduled visit, not because it was a holiday. He came with work clothes and a toolbox. "Dad, I want to help build that new playground equipment you mentioned for the kids." We worked side by side that day for the first time since he was a teenager learning to use tools in my workshop. But this time was different. This time, he was choosing to be there. Sophia and Peter came too, playing with the neighborhood kids. While we worked, I watched Robert interact with Tommy, with Marcus, with Aisha, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Robert as a teacher, as a mentor, as someone who understood that giving back mattered more than getting ahead. Carla brought lunch for everyone, not just our family, but all the kids who were there, all the parents who were helping. She fit into our little community like she'd always belonged there. That evening, as we cleaned up tools and put away materials, Robert said something that still gives me chills. "Dad, I spent so much time trying to make you proud of me that I forgot to be proud of you." But then he said something even more important. "And I spent so much time thinking about what you hadn't given me that I never asked what you were trying to teach me." "What do you think I was trying to teach you?" I asked. "That work matters. That building something beautiful takes time and patience. That taking care of your family means sacrificing for their future." He paused, watching Sophia and Peter play with kids from the neighborhood. But I think I missed the most important lesson, which was that family isn't just the people who share your name. Family is who you choose to take care of. Over the next year, Robert became a regular volunteer in what everyone now called Grandpa's Project. He taught basic business skills to the teenagers in my woodworking program. He helped families navigate financial planning and college applications. He used his professional network to find internships and job opportunities for young people in the neighborhood. But more than that, he started bringing his own children into the work we were doing. Sophia and Peter became regular fixtures at the community garden, the tutoring sessions, and the woodworking classes. They learned that helping others wasn't charity. It was community. Watching my grandchildren grow up as part of something larger than themselves, seeing them develop empathy and purpose alongside their academic skills, felt like the greatest gift I could give them. Today, 18 months later, Grandpa's project has helped over 200 children with tutoring, taught carpentry skills to 80 teenagers, and our community garden feeds 15 families regularly. But the numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is Tommy, now in remission and thriving in school, who wants to study medicine so he can help other sick kids. The real story is Marcus, who's now in advanced math classes and still talks about becoming an astronaut. The real story is Asisha, whose drawings now hang in the local library and who's planning to study architecture. The real story is Mrs. Thompson, who went from a lonely widow to the neighborhood grandmother everyone goes to for advice. The real story is Mr. Patterson, whose tool library has prevented dozens of families from going into debt for home repairs. The real story is Maria, who's now studying nursing part-time because the babysitting cooperative gives her the flexibility to pursue her dreams. But maybe the most important story is Robert and me. We talk every few days now. Not because we have to, but because we want to. He brings his family over every Saturday, not for obligatory dinner, but to be part of the community we've built together. Last month, the mayor gave me a community service award. Standing on that stage, looking at the crowd of kids, parents, and neighbors I've had the honor to serve, I realized something profound. Being abandoned by my son wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my real purpose. For 45 years, I thought being a good father meant providing money, security, material things. I was wrong. Being a good father, being a good person, means teaching by example how to serve others. My son didn't abandon me because I was worthless. He pulled away because he forgot what I had tried to teach him all along, that our value comes from what we give, not what we have. And in that pulling away, he gave me the greatest gift possible, the chance to discover that my purpose was bigger than just being his father. If you're watching this and feeling forgotten, abandoned, or thinking your best days are behind you, I want you to understand something. Your age doesn't determine your worth. Your past doesn't define your future. And sometimes, when one door closes, it's because you're meant to build an entire house. There are people in your community right now who need exactly what you have to offer. Your experience, your skills, your wisdom, your time. You don't need your family's permission to be valuable. You don't need anyone's approval to make a difference. Start small. Help one person. Teach one skill. Share one meal. Listen to one lonely neighbor. Plant one seed. I promise you, the ripple effects will surprise you. And maybe, just maybe, the people who thought they didn't need you will realize they want to be part of something beautiful you're creating. Today I'm 75 years old, and I can honestly say these have been the most meaningful years of my life. Not because I'm no longer abandoned, but because I learned that love multiplies when you give it away. Your story isn't over. Your purpose is waiting for you to discover it. The question isn't whether you matter. The question is, who are you going to help discover that they matter too? Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait for someone else to make the first move. Your community needs you. Your neighborhood needs you. There's a child somewhere who needs exactly the wisdom you've gained from your years of experience. There's an elderly neighbor who needs exactly the companionship you can provide. There's a family struggling with exactly the problem you know how to solve. You have everything you need to change someone's life today. The only question is, will you 9?